A ladle settled, and the broth glanced the candle. On the linen, a dark vial leaned like a modest confession, and the bowl received its season without a ripple. Ribbons in the window's reflection stirred as if they remembered wind. The door forgot its breath. High in the rafters, a hinge counted once and then chose not to count again. The packed earth under the gallery took a step and folded it into itself, to be spoken later by rain. Before we step inside this story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what is the time there right now, because we want to know how fast our story has to reach you. Silence learned its task and held the table still. Carnival color trembled on glass and quieted, as if the room had been warned about joy. The vial cast a small shadow that behaved like ink, a ledger line pretending to be evening. The ladle paused to listen and believed what the bowl told it. Hinge oil kept the door from explaining anything at all. Outside, the gallery boards remembered shoe leather by weight and not by name. Inside, the breath of flame wrote a narrow sentence and then erased it with its own smoke. The ground remembered. The house kept its book first and its colors after. Ink rehearsed ownership in obedient lines. Iron keys spoke against a silk sash with the patience of weather over stone. Invitations lay beside receipts, gilt edging beside figures that did not blink. And in that pairing, mercy took attendance but did not answer to its name. The overseer's arithmetic walked the rows like march time, heel and cane, heel and cane. Stillness became a craft no column could total, worn like linen that would not rustle. Windows counted footfalls and pretended they did not. Oil asked the hinges to be discreet, and they agreed to speak only in breath. At the threshold, the earth was tamped to a kind of memory that did not require words. The mistress turned a page and found a name reduced to an initial, a neatness that satisfied the pen. The ledger admired its own symmetry and folded itself to rest with a seal's small weight to keep it faithful. On such a night, color would be permitted so long as nothing escaped the line. The door kept its poise, and the window wore its own reflection, like a second skin. The ground remembered and did not tell. He poured and trimmed wicks and set porcelain beneath silver, moving in the seam where truth survives. The cane's tap set a pulse he did not answer, and the lamp obeyed. Behind his eyes, two small flashes kept time. A sister sold up river on a rain day, the bell on the levee laughing too loud. A father's back blue with arithmetic, each line an entry that no one would read aloud. His breath took their measure and stayed even. A drawer kept a folded cloth that remembered lamp oil. When unfolded, the smell made the room lower its voice. In a cupboard, a labeled tonic waited with its quiet warmth for the tongue, its numbness for the hand. The bottle's mouth was a dark, careful circle. Names lived under the tongue, safe as beans in a pocket, counting themselves to pass the time. The window watched and forgot on command. The spoon touched a rim and did not ring. In the seam of the house, where the ledger's lines thinned, stillness held. The ground listened through the posts and filed what it heard in silt. Mardi Gras neared and plates multiplied. Rumor moved quicker than music. Salt clumped in the dish and made a low hill. Someone said the air had turned. A rooster found the wrong hour and declared it anyway. By the well, a child's rhyme warned the window not to look when lanterns walked, and the rhyme stuck to the bucket's echo and came back smaller. The mistress read receipt cures as if syllables could coax heat into reason. The overseer kept a private cordial, and the bottle wore its label like a permit. In the quarters, symptoms traded themselves for signs and back again. The menu card named abundance in a hand that never washed the platters. The cough rag was folded inward, stain to stain, to make the mark behave. A door jamb learned to hold light as a palm holds water, brief, trembling, determined. Laudanum's brown glass admired the candle and did not blink. A tonic promised steadiness and delivered a sleep with edges. On the gallery, voices walked softer at dusk because dusk had begun listening. The Hinges learned a new courtesy and refused to confess what they knew. Rumor learned names that medicine had not earned. A woman in a neighboring parish had swallowed a remedy too deep. A man elsewhere mistook his dose and slept through his own anger. A child was soothed beyond waking. The ledger did not carry these as more than cost or absence. In the kitchen, breath fogged a small square of glass and left it changed. Lanterns rehearsed their path and stayed put. The door did not choose a side. Ribbons waited to be tied to wrists that had learned the weight of obedience. The earth at the threshold kept its quiet. The house prepared to be a stage, and then reconsidered, and chose to be a room. The ground remembered, because that is work the ground knows how to do. A planter's smile slowed by the width of a breath. A lady's hand found the table's edge and stayed, as if wood could finish a sentence the mouth had left open. The spoon's shadow lengthened and forgot to return. In the kitchen, damp air took the blame because it could not argue back, and a whisper named bad spirits with the same care used for measuring flour. Teaspoons learned their even portion, one quiet circle at a time. The ledger kept its lines even as well, turning bodies to numbers and hours to evidence, while neither book nor bottle could agree on what the body owed. A napkin came away cool from a brow and kept its wet grief folded in, damp as a promise that would not be spoken aloud. Hinges acquired a new courtesy. They breathed instead of speaking. The lamp lowered, not as a warning, but as if to hear a confession better. Wick bowed like ahead. Beyond the door, laughter tested its legs and stood uncertain. The window fogged and cleared, practicing ignorance the way a trained face learns not to flinch. The teaspoon found the rim again and did not ring. A hand that never trembled miscounted once, then steadied, and the room chose to forgive it by pretending to be busy. Drops were counted. So were steps. So were sighs, which can be tallied if a house has learned to listen. A line was drawn in the ledger where none was needed, and a line went missing where one might have helped, which is how ink becomes a kind of weather. The napkin dried to stiffness, and the lamp, patient, lifted a little, as if the ear had heard enough for now. The kitchen spoke of damp, of meat that would not set right, of wind caught wrong in the chimney. The parlor spoke of nerves and overexcitement, and the pity of thin blood. The pantry said nothing at all, which felt like wisdom. The hinge breathed again and did not tire. The window, practiced in fog and clarity, chose neither for a moment and simply held a dull pain of itself. The ground at the threshold learned a heavier print and kept its softness where the heel would find it. The room, taught by teaspoons and lampwick, learned to count without moving its lips. A ribbon fell from a mask and did not complain when it was pocketed. A strip of linen remembered other duties and agreed to one more. A cork with a darkened lip lay down like a witness who would not be called. A kitchen match slept in a hem, sulfur tucked quiet as a thumbprint. Small things were assembled, and each was taught its use the way a child learns a hymn, low, patient, without applause. The moon agreed to be absent. Behind shutters, its refusal felt like permission. In the street, Music declared itself, and steps followed the noise, while other steps chose the rug's edge where footsteps are harvested softly. Paces were counted from pantry to table, 10, from door to hall, 6, from the end of the sideboard to the unseen place behind the curtain, 3 and a patience. Keys in a ring dozed like old teeth that believed their bite still mattered. The latch knew iron's weight and minded it. The ribbon made a loose knot in practice and held. Linen rehearsed a fold, then a second, then unlearned both to become only a strip, a line that could be placed where lines need to be. The cork, stained at the mouth, remembered a label's promise and a different night's silence. The match carried its sulfur like a prayer best spoken when no one is looking. Air learned the shape of those objects and stood nearer to them, listening. Breath took on a liturgy. 12 for those whose names were buried under numbers. 3 for the ones never written. 1 for the name the tongue would not surrender even to mercy. The doorjamb collected light and cupped it like water. The hinge drew oil in and held its breath as if to test whether it was alive. In rooms stained by color, the root drew itself. Pantry to bowl, bowl to table, table to mouth, mouth to story. The counting continued under steam, a quiet arithmetic where the result is known before the numbers begin. The parade outside gave cover to the hour, beating time for those who required noise, while other hands required stillness. Within, cloth weighted on the wrist and did not betray weight. Without, a fiddler pulled a tune that did not hear its own edge. The ground, pressed by the gallery's shadow, made a soft account of steps in case someone should ask it later. It would not answer, but it would remember where the asking was done. Bowls settled like bells turned inward, their mouths open only to themselves. Spoons rang once and accepted silence like a rule finally learned. From a distant parlor, a hymn fragment lost its words at the doorjamb and stood there, humming without the burden of meaning. The ledger dozed in its drawer, satisfied with its balance and the weight of its seal. Justice, priced by the day, chose sleep beside it. The doorjamb grew its small breeze and kept it. Cloth was tested with a wrist, and the wrist reported readiness without pride. Time married hinge breath. In, the soft labor of wood and oil. Out, the same. Measured breath rose from the table like a fine mist and left no stain. A hand adjusted a bowl by the width of a spoon's handle, and the table agreed to hold what it was given. There is a way a room makes a ring of itself. The window declines to watch and instead reflects a second room that keeps to its manners. The iron latch learns the weight of a look and pretends to be a thing without intentions. The spoon, after its single bell, lies down with its face to the ceiling and shows nothing of what it knows. Underneath, the floor listens with its boards and vows not to judge. If anyone laughed, it was gentle and did not travel far. If anyone's hand paused, another hand continued, because motion is the house's second god. The ledger in the drawer breathed once, the way paper does when the night lifts, and then it slept better than most. The cloth over an arm learned to be river if asked, and then learned to be cloth again. Breath moved under plates like a little weather. The parade's distant drum reached the wall and lost its courage. Here, a smaller noise ruled. China edged against wood, a cuff brushed linen, the candle's low sermon about patience. The table made a covenant with the hour: hold, receive, forget. The air signed with ash, the hinge signed with nothing at all. Names were not spoken in the room, their echo lived inside the chest instead, and the chest kept time in a language not taught by bell or book. Outside, the marchers kept their shine. Inside, A different kind of measure prevailed, precise as an oath that would never be written. The act was a litany without trumpet. Ladles moved as if hands were reading. Steam lifted and read the air back, line by line, an unwritten homily about heat and patience. Each quiet pour married itself to a name never written, and the mouth that spoke the name did so inside the breath, where the ledger could not eavesdrop. The tally did not need chalk. Windows kept their glass and became walls. Doors chose to be walls too. The room took one long breath and did not return it. In the grate, fire stayed polite, a red animal content to wait until told. Cloth over the wrist learned to be weather without calling itself by name. The bowl received, and the bowl kept faith with what it received. Names walked through the chest, shoulder to shoulder, and stood in a line like a procession the world would not allow in daylight. The ladle traced a crescent in the air and put it down like a signature only one person could read. The steam, beholding itself in the window's patient face, wrote its brief fate and vanished on contact, as if not to trouble the glass with memory. There were no announcements. The spoon did not volunteer to be bell again. The table did its work of holding. Walls listened with the grain. A wrist, having learned what cloth can do, remembered how to be ordinary. The ember lidded and opened, an eye without judgment. The match in the hem slept on. The names, being counted as a justice no court could weigh, finished their ascent and turned to stand in place. The ladles, done with their river, learned the stillness of tools clean of speech. The breath the room had borrowed came back in thin portions and practiced being air. Outside, parade noise tilted and then forgot this house. Inside, the measure ended where it began, in a silence that pressed and then agreed to lift, slow and exact. The window looked like a window again. The door remembered it was a threshold and held its line. The cloth folded into itself, the way a river returns to bed when night has the bank. Fire listened and did not speak. The steam that had learned names left no letters behind, which is how a tally keeps its dignity. The ground beneath the table held the weight it was given and stored it beside other nights that had not asked for witnesses. The ground remembered. 4 places dimmed by degrees. Napkins folded themselves into slow birds and settled as if cloth could decide to become quiet. Footsteps widened and forgot their measure. Laughter tried to stand and chose the chair instead. The teaspoon rested and dreamed itself a bell. The ground under the gallery received a stumble and kept it soft, the way earth edits grief without erasing it. Rain considered the eaves and decided against speech. The places learned a hush no toast could loosen. Glasses held their light like tired lanterns. A cuff searched the table's edge and found the patience of wood. A shadow grew underneath a plate, precise as a ledger line, and then thinned, as if ink had been asked to be kind. The window wore its own reflection and returned nothing. The door preferred to be a wall and continued its vow. Napkin birds slept on wrists. Spoons forgot to answer. The rim. The bowl remembered what it had received and did not discuss it. A chair made a small noise that apologized for being heard. On the floorboards, a heel placed itself more carefully and was forgiven. In that mercy, silence learned to count. 1 breath, 2. 1 name, 2. Outside, parade music examined the siding and lost courage. Inside, breath rethreaded itself, a stitch that knows the seam will hold if it is not watched. The teaspoon's bell dream persisted, tender and unrequired. Steam wrote its last faint cursive against the glass and left no trace. The cloth found the lap and became a lap again. The soft patch by the step waited for a weight that knew it well. What moved now moved as if under water. Language, if it came, would have been a hand on a shoulder, not a sentence. The ground held the moment where the foot faltered and kept it level, a courtesy older than law. Rain withheld its verdict. The house counted, and when it reached the number it feared, it did not say it out loud. It only taught the light how to stand still. The book wrote property and loss with the same hand and praised itself for evenness. Testimony was sifted until only what paid could travel. Ink admired straightness. Docket lines stood like cane after frost, stiff, blanched, sure of their posture. An iron pen made its cold scratch and took it for virtue. Elsewhere, men had walked free by arithmetic, and forgetting had taken the oath as policy. Names were turned to instruments, bodies to entries, silence to compliance. A seal pressed down the margin until the paper felt sure of itself. The erased space did not argue. The page had already decided what absence meant. The door to that room learned no kinder dialect. Its hinge refused grace and called it order. Outside, weather kept its schedule. Inside, a clerk aligned sheets and admired the obedience of paper. A line item counted hours lost, not breath taken. A signature balanced columns and told itself this was a kind of justice. Under the steps, earth held the weight of all who waited and filed it beside older weights that had needed the same patience. The threshold was packed firm, as if true testimony preferred soil to oath. When the ink dried, the book declared a witness unnecessary. It had written. Names retreated to the only place untouched by stamps or seals, the mouth that would not release them. The window in that room pretended to be a mirror, because reflection offends no one. The door closed with its iron idea of mercy. The page slept. The ground did not. It kept the docket other hands could not read, and it made no noise about it. A cork with a dark mouth slept in a drawer. A ribbon remembered oil and kept the scent under its color. By the well, children taught a rule. Windows must not watch when lanterns walk. They set it as a game and never asked who taught it first. Heels counted dust into ceremony. The step kept a soft patch even in good weather, as if a word were buried there that refused to harden. A hinge received oil more often than needed and did not complain about generosity. Door frames were rubbed to the patience of old shoulders. Windows practiced the right blink. When the drawer opened, iron and cloth took one breath and returned to their sleep, polite as relics that know they are not to be handled. A faint trace rose. Lamp oil, a memory of rain, linen that dried too quickly, and the room, unbidden, held its breath. The rhyme outlasted faces. Lanterns walked in the telling and did not spill their light. Someone's heel leaned where the ground was kind and found the kindness still there. The hinge kept its newer courtesy and pretended it had always known silence as grammar. In another house, a menu card curled at the edge and learned to be blank. In this one, a small stain chose to remain small. The well took the rhyme and returned it smaller, yet it returned it. This is how fragments keep. A last light made a thin ring on a glass rim and held it there. Two shadows folded into the grain of the hall and stayed as if wood could archive breath. This was not revenge. It was a weight returned to a leaning scale and set down without trumpet or audience. Windows chose to close and called it dignity. Hinges accepted oil like a blessing and forgot their ache for a while. The house resumed its angle as if nothing had ever moved, though the air wore a new seam. In the grate, An ember practiced patience. On the table, a spoon lay like a narrow hand at rest. Somewhere under the threshold, earth kept a place soft for a heel it recognized. The ledger slept with its seal and dreamed its straight-line dream. The ground did not sleep. It remembered in the way that soil remembers, by holding shape, by keeping weight, by knowing where water turns back. Walk with us into future investigations if these quiet rooms still call. Press like to keep this small flame tended, share so the hush can cross to other tables, subscribe to be told when the next door eases open, and in the comments leave a single word, listening or remembering, so the ledger of witness knows a presence stood here.